Welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, and this week we celebrate some old white South Africans. Now that might sound like we're having a reunion of the National Party. We're not. We're taking some South African white wine that's a little older and seeing if it has stood the test of time. I have a firm belief that we tend to drink too many of our South African white wines too early. We don't give them enough time to express themselves. We're drinking 2017 Sauvignon Blanc in 2017 when maybe it should be 2018 or 2019. But beyond that, some of our wine, I think, has got the ability and the potential to age, if not quite as long as some of our better reds, and certainly a lot longer than we might initially give them credit for. And so I've picked 4 this week that I think might just have done that job. And I haven't gone too far back with the first one. I've gone back 6 years, so 2011, and this is from the Bosman family vineyards in Wellington. They're about the 6th or 7th generation of the family now running things, and Carla, who looks after the team down there, stands guard over a Vinotech that I've tried unsuccessfully to break into on a number of occasions, but she did very kindly supply me with a bottle of this. It's very nicely wrapped up. It wins points just on aesthetics, but it's what's inside and whether a 6-year-old white wine gets us off to a good start that's far more important. So there are 4 varietals that I'm having a look at today to see how they've aged, and the first of these is a Chenin. It wasn't that long ago you saw us talking about Chenin. I've promised to drink more in 2017, and this is a really good one to have a look at. So it's 6 years old from an estate that, as you can see from the label, goes back to 1699, so it does have a little bit of heritage. And they've also got a great approach at Bosman. They're very keen on the environment. They're very keen on looking after their team. They've won a number of awards for running not just an efficient, but an environmentally friendly and inclusive estate. So lots of good karma points. Does that translate into keeping a white wine going for 6 years? A Chenin should be more than comfortable if it's good enough to get through 6 years. Let's see if the Optenhorst does the trick. So it does have a nice, strong, robust nose, but the first thing you'll notice, and more pronounced as we get through the other wines, is the colour. As the white wine gets older, so it gets darker. And this has got a lovely golden hue to it. It's just catching that light quite beautifully. And just a little swirl of sediment, the gentlest of swirls on the top, which just reminds you that it's not a youngster. It's kind of middle-aged, I suppose, as white wines go. 6 years old now that we're in 2017, and I think that could be just about perfect for drinking this. So it wasn't that long ago, as I mentioned, we had some Chenin on the show. This is very different. In a blind tasting, you wouldn't say it was anywhere near what we'd had in our previous Chenin show. It's 6 years old, so it's going to be different. It's not going to be as young and as youthful and kicking up its heels, perhaps, as a younger Chenin Blanc would be. It's got a nice, big, full feel to it. There is a slight zesty sharpness to it. But this is a wine, as a lot of older white wine is, that needs some good food to go with it. And I think this really would pair nicely with a nice big meal. And it doesn't always have to be fish or chicken. You can have red meat if you'd like, or tuna, for instance. I think a nice piece of seared tuna probably go beautifully with this because it would give it something to sink its teeth into. The colour's great, the nose is lovely, and 6 years on, it's developed into a very different wine to the wine it started life as, but that's no bad thing. And I think 1 out of 4 so far, we're doing quite nicely for the older whites. From a 6-year-old Chenin to a 10-year-old Sauvignon Blanc, the Bin 242 Sauvignon Blanc from Mirandel. I did some dessert wine late last year, and it included Mirandel's dessert wine, which I love. I also like what they do with their whites. They've got a lovely Vinotech down at Mirandel, and this is quite appropriate having an older white for Mirandel because Herman, the man who owns the place, is an older white who's aged beautifully. He still skis and rides mountain bikes and is obscenely athletic, and his wines, by and large, seem to have stayed in equally good stead. So this is 10 years old. It's a Sauvignon Blanc. Now, you'd never in South Africa think of keeping a Sauvignon Blanc for 10 years. And I remember giving this to somebody a few years ago, and they took a glass, smiled at me and said, "Dan, that's one of the loveliest Chardonnays I've had in a while." So you can expect it to be a hugely different wine to that original Sauvignon Blanc, very different characteristics, but if it does hold itself, those characteristics combine for a beautiful older wine. So again, The nose is secondary in terms of what you notice. It's that colour, and this has got a slightly more yellowy gold to it. It's just getting a bit older, and it looks regal indeed, doesn't it? But it also does have a lovely nose. It's slightly more muted than I might have anticipated, but it's a little older. It can do what it wants, really, I suppose, after 10 years. But just that colour invites you in and says, have a nice big sip and see if I'm still good. And you know what it is? There's also that similar little hint of zest, that very slight sharpness that we got on the Chenin from Bosman. This though has got a smoothness to it. There's a very gentle woody feel to it, and it's got that older Sauvignon Blanc characteristic of no longer being light and fresh and sweeping across the dance floor. It's sitting at the side of the dance floor, feet up, and just enjoying the view. Slightly heavier than it would have been a decade ago, and again a wine that I think can go very nicely with food. It might not have too much longer in it. It's that zest and that slight sharpness suggests it's maybe coming to the end of its tenure, but it's been a good tenure. It's lasted a decade, and I think it's still drinking quite nicely. All right, we're getting older by another year. 2006, and as you can see, the label is just a little more weathered, and there's even a hint of dust, which I assure you I didn't spray on before just to make it look aged and authentic. Waterford is an estate that's also featured before we had the gem in the very first episode of Dan Really Likes Wine. I've got a collection of some older Waterford Chardonnay. It's an estate I've got great memories from. During the 2010 World Cup, I took Marcel Desailly, the former France football captain, on a trip through Waterford. He declared it one of the loveliest places he'd ever been, and I think the large amount of wine we all had for lunch had a small role to play in our enthusiastic enjoyment. But it is one of the grander and more celebrated estates in Stellenbosch, and the Chardonnay that I've had of a greater vintage generally has been most pleasant. So this is 11 years old. Again, it's white wine territory most South Africans wouldn't begin to think of. Use this to clean your septic tank or get some spots off your car or do something along those lines. Certainly not drink it. But I've got a sneaking suspicion that despite being 11 years old, this Chardonnay might surprise. So I mentioned with that first wine there was that swirl of sediment. There's a little of the same here. You can see some bubbles coming through. It's a wine that's finally being released from his bottle, genie-like, after 11 years. Now, if there is a white wine that's going to age, it probably is Chardonnay, and particularly in Europe, Chardonnays and white Burgundies you'll find will be older and certainly drinkable, and I think this could well compete. And that is lovely. A year or two ago, I had a bottle of the 04 Chardonnay, and it was probably the nicest bottle of wine I had that particular year. This, not quite there, but still very good indeed. It's that nice big fullness, a wine you can sink your teeth into. You're not quite chewing it, because that wouldn't be so good, but it's a wine that really does have so much substance to it. It's aged, it's layered, it's got some texture to it, and again, as with all of these wines, and I'm sure the last one will be the same as well, it's a wine that really lends itself to some food, a great meal, and a great wine. This really does illustrate what I'd like to believe South African white wine can age, and here is an 11-year-old Chardonnay. It's sitting very comfortably, doesn't look like it's going anywhere. I could probably have kept this for another couple of years. I'm very happy I've opened it now though, because it is lovely. And so to the last of our quartet for this week. And there's a very personal note to this, because Haute Espoir is run by the single largest human being on earth, a guy called Big Rob. He's probably got a surname, but I've got no idea what it is, but he is a very good friend of mine. We're at university together, and he now has an enormous amount of fun making wine and catching snakes out in Franschhoek. Those would be his two main fields of endeavour. He makes some delightful wine. His Gentle Giant has always been a lot of fun to drink as a red blend, and he's had a lot of fun with his Chardonnay as well. But it's this Semyon that I was interested in trying out. It is 13 years old. Now, 13-year-old Semyon probably suggests you'll be on Gaviscon for at least the next month. But I'm hoping it might prove a little different to general expectations. Big Rob makes his wine with a lot of love, with a lot of care. I'm not sure I know anybody who's quite as passionate about what they do, and he's also the most generous person I know. Go around to visit him and you'll have a very, very special time indeed. And they've just opened a brand new tasting room, so well worth a visit. Is it worth visiting their Semyon 13 years after they've made it? Well, this might be the last glass of wine I ever drink. If I topple over and leave this earth, well, so be it. But I kind of think I'll be okay. So the colour here just a little different. The last two wines nudging to that yellower side of gold. This is a paler gold. There's almost a rose gold look to it, and it just looks elegant and it looks refined. A Semyon you don't get a huge amount of to begin with. Aged Semyon, well, that's particularly rare. 13-year-old Semyon, well, I'm not sure there's much of it at all. So I'm very lucky to have my hands on a bottle, and I'm rather looking forward to this. And that's really good as well. There's not the depth of the Chardonnay perhaps, but then you wouldn't expect it. They're two very different types of grape. This is a lighter grape, but it's held itself really well. The transformation, not as pronounced as you might expect for a 13-year-old wine. In fact, I'm not sure I would have picked it as being anywhere near as old if I had done a blind tasting. There's still a freshness to it, 13 years on. There's still a lightness to it. The colour, as I've said, is extraordinary, and it just sits delightfully on the palate. So this sums up really what all these wines are about. They are older South African white wines, and whether it's a case of just keeping a bottle of Sauvignon Blanc for another year or two to develop a little, or putting a couple of extra special bottles away in the corner and make sure they're bottles that are of the slightly higher quality that are going to last the test of time, as these four have shown, you really do have the ability in South Africa to give white wine a little more time. Cheers.